Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. A startling revelation in Alec Baldwin's first interview since the deadly Rush shooting.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
And the federal trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. Experts break down the logistics of the socialite's alleged sexual grooming. A New Hampshire man on trial for the murder of his wife. But could the latest witness scrap the defense's claim of suicide?
Based on your many interactions with your sister, did she ever appear suicidal?
No.
And later,
the schools did have contact with the student the day before and the day of the shooting for behavior in the classroom that they felt was concerning.
The shocking moments leading up to the deadly school shooting in Oxford, Michigan. Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. Actor Alec Baldwin speaks extensively for the first time about the shooting on the set of Rust that killed cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with Baldwin's surprising comments.
Brian, Alec Baldwin spoke with ABC News, and he claims that he didn't pull the trigger on the gun that killed Halyna Hutchins. This interview came shortly after the release of a new search warrant for PDQ Arms and Prop in New Mexico. The affidavit for that warrant says the company provided the firearms and ammunition for the set of Rust. Hutchins was killed in October when Baldwin was practicing a cross draw on the film's set. Since then, questions have been raised about how live ammo made it onto the set and the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, and assistant director Dave Halls, who handed the gun to Baldwin that day. This is part of what Alec Baldwin told ABC News.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
Now, Baldwin started to cry as he said that everyone loved and admired Halyna Hutchins. Meanwhile, attorneys for Gutierrez-Reed, the film's armorer, say the sheriff's office has taken a huge step in unearthing the truth by executing a search warrant at PDQ Arm and Prop. An attorney for that prop shop and the shop's owner says that he has been cooperating since the beginning of this investigation. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Joining us today is civil rights attorney Katie Smith and Terry Austin. Katie, Hutchins' family must be listening intensely to these statements made by Alec Baldwin. Do you see anything that affects Baldwin in terms of a civil lawsuit?
Absolutely, Brian. I mean, guns don't go off by themselves, right? This should never have happened. It's a travesty. And there is some way to apportion the fault and the blame from either a criminal perspective or from a civil perspective. Just because he didn't pull the trigger does not mean he didn't somehow unlawfully or recklessly handle that weapon, or it had to have discharged by some sort of malfunction. So these are things that by examining the weapon, they will be able to determine with some specificity in a forensic way.
All right, so Terry, that's the civil side, and that's a lower standard. So let's look at a higher standard in criminal perspective. So would Alec Baldwin say absolve him of all guilt, or is there still a possibility he could face criminal charges?
There is still that possibility, Brian, that he could face criminal charges. The DA actually said they're not ruling out criminal charges for anyone. It's everything on the table. And regardless of what Alex states in an interview, he is still the person holding the gun. The one thing I am curious about is why he didn't mention this immediately after the event occurred, because now he's saying it, weeks later. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It sounds like this is just something that his lawyers have told him to say. So I think he could possibly face some criminal liability. And certainly the assistant director who said cold gun, meaning safe, could face criminal liability as well.
Absolutely, still liability for a lot of people on that set. Anjanette, back to Baldwin's claim that he didn't pull the trigger on the revolver. Is that possible?
I spoke with two firearms experts, and one of them I actually interviewed here on the Law and Crime Network, and he said that's not really possible. He said it's possible that he had his finger on the trigger but didn't actually feel that he pulled it, and maybe that, he actually did pull it without pulling it back a lot, and he feels he didn't pull the trigger, but he thinks it's basically impossible. And also, Dave Halls, that assistant director, I should mention, he actually is backing up that claim. His attorney is in that ABC News special and says that Halls has said from day one that Baldwin didn't pull the trigger. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this.
Absolutely. A lot of forensics, both in terms of DNA or fingerprints, perhaps, and also the operation of that weapon. But we'll absolutely give you updates as we continue. Moving on to Minnesota, a jury selection continues for ex-cop Kim Potter. 11 jurors are seated so far, 5 men and 6 women. 8 jurors are white, 2 are Asian, and 1 is black. In all, there will be 12 jurors with 2 alternates. Potter is charged with manslaughter in the shooting death of Daunte Wright. It happened during a traffic stop just outside Minneapolis in Brooklyn Center in April. Police were pulling Wright over for an expired tag when they determined he had an outstanding warrant. As they attempted to take him into custody, body camera video showed him resisting. Potter warns Wright he's going to tase him, but instead of pulling out her taser, she pulled out her gun and shot Wright in the chest. The former cop's defense argues the shooting was an accident. When the full jury is seated, the trial will begin on December 8th. Law&Crime will bring you full coverage from the courtroom. More controversy from the family behind a hit Netflix show, Tiger King. The daughter of central figure Bhagavan Doc Antle is arrested in connection to a shooting in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Tawny Sky Antle is charged with unlawfully possessing a pistol after police found a weapon in the vehicle she was riding in. Officials say the vehicle matched a description of one linked to a shooting over the weekend. The driver, 30-year-old Derek Frost, allegedly had a Glock visible in the side door, stored without a concealed weapons permit. Both were booked and later released on personal recognizance bonds. Antle also faces separate charges relating to her father, Doc Antle's animal trafficking charges. Antle was featured on the documentary Tiger King alongside breakout star Joe Exotic. As Law&Crime Daily reported last week, Exotic is now being treated for prostate cancer at a federal medical center. He is serving out a sentence on a murder-for-hire conviction stemming from a plot to kill wildlife activist Carol Baskin. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, a New Hampshire man faces life in prison for the murder of his wife. But could her death have been a suicide? But first...
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law&Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law&Crime network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law&Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law&Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. Our coverage continues now in the federal trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, the one-time socialite and companion of Jeffrey Epstein. On Thursday, a former Epstein employee testified he saw many topless women at the disgraced financier's estate. 59-year-old Maxwell is charged with multiple sex trafficking crimes for allegedly helping Epstein groom girls as young as 14 for sexual abuse. Federal prosecutors say Maxwell sometimes participated in illegal sex acts. On Thursday, the prosecution called Juan Alessi, the housekeeper for Epstein's Palm Beach estate from 1990 to 2002. Alessi described Maxwell as the, quote, lady of the house, and said Epstein didn't like to be looked at in the eyes. He also told jurors he saw many women at Epstein's pool, often going topless. Ahead of his testimony, the prosecution called an expert witness to testify about grooming behaviors in child sex abuse cases. Maxwell's defense team maintains she is a scapegoat for Jeffrey Epstein. She has pled not guilty to all charges. 2 years ago, Epstein was found dead by suicide just months after his arrest on federal charges of sex trafficking. Let's bring back civil rights attorney Katie Smith and Terry Austin. Terry, we've seen testimony about grooming minors before, like in the R. Kelly trial. So how does this expert's testimony tie in with the first alleged victim, Jane?
Brian, this expert's testimony tied in perfectly to what Jane was saying. The expert was a psychologist, and she was basically talking about interpersonal violence and traumatic stress. And what she said about grooming is that the abuser selects their victims, and they use lies and deception and manipulation to set that stage for abuse, and they try to normalize sexual activity. And Jane testified exactly to that. She said that Maxwell walked up to her, had a cute little dog, and basically after that, Epstein walked up and asked Jane for her phone number, and eventually they took her and they, abused her. So it just matched perfectly with what the expert was saying.
So that is about this alleged victim's own experiences and how it connects with what the expert is saying. Katie, on the other side, in the afternoon of day 4, Juan Alessi, who ran Epstein's home, testified. What's the prosecution really getting at about the environment of topless women and things going around in Epstein's home?
That's the thing, Brian. You don't want to tread into territory that winds up being excluded because it is more prejudicial than it is probative. But the problem here, because we have this missing seed of Epstein, that we need to establish first that there was illegal activity going on there and a culture that fostered that in addition to the grooming behaviors. And second, that she participated in it. So we're going to have a wide swath of information that's going to be coming in to really paint the true den of depravity that was that residence.
Den of depravity. I think that's the term that the prosecution is probably going to want to hitch their wagon to come summation. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you both. Switching coasts now to federal court in California, where former Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes faces cross-examination while on the stand. Now 11 weeks into the trial, prosecutors hit Holmes hard in her days-long testimony, questioning her extensively about a relationship with former CEO Ramesh Sunny Balwani. Holmes' defense team claims she was romantically involved with Balwani in what lawyers describe as a, quote, abusive partner relationship. Part of Holmes' defense also puts blame on Theranos' employees. As a former CEO testified, she was told progress was on track at the startup. But prosecutors grilled Holmes in the cross-examination, suggesting she knew her company couldn't fulfill promises. They argued Holmes tried to silence whistleblowers and attempted to kill an investigative report exposing Theranos' flawed technology. The Silicon Valley lab was touted as a breakthrough blood testing company, claiming to be faster and cheaper than traditional blood testing. Later, tests found many issues with Holmes' Edison device. Holmes' testimony is expected to be heavy as the jury decides whether to convict her on criminal fraud, which could lead to decades behind bars. Holmes' cross-examination resumes next week. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a 15-year-old school shooter will be tried as an adult. What rare charges he now faces following Tuesday's deadly shooting in Michigan. Plus, witness testimony continues in New Hampshire versus William Argie. The jury hears from those close to both the defendant and the victim. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. A New Hampshire man faces life in prison for the murder of his wife. He says she committed suicide, but testimony from her brother says otherwise. Prosecutors say 46-year-old William Bill Argie killed his wife, Maureen, back in 2019. They say he strangled or suffocated her. After that, they say he attempted suicide, ran off, and gambled at a casino. Argie's defense maintains his wife committed suicide and that he found her in the bed with a sheet around her neck. At the time of her death, Argie faced a gambling addiction, mounting debt, and job loss. He was also the sole beneficiary of his wife's $400,000 life insurance policy. On Thursday, Maureen Argie's brother took the stand, testifying he spoke to his sister often before her death, without seeing any red flags.
Based on your many interactions with your sister, did she ever appear suicidal?
No.
Were you and your family supportive of her plans to move out and to proceed with the divorce of her husband?
Yes.
And when you spoke with Maureen about these plans, what was her tone of voice and her demeanor like during these conversations?
Maureen wanted to go through with the divorce, but she was worried about how it would impact her children. That was her main primary focus. She didn't want the children to have to go through it and for the children to be affected by it in any way, and that was one of the reasons, that was her reason for staying and trying to make it work constantly.
A friend of Bill Argie also took the stand, testifying he spoke to the defendant just days before his wife's death.
He was not doing good. He was in a bad place. He was very angry and sad at the same time.
Do you recall him saying anything about his job status?
At that time, I do recall him saying he didn't have a job.
What do you recall him saying about the status of his marriage?
That it was crumbling, that Maureen was asking for a divorce.
Do you recall him discussing bankruptcy?
I do.
And what did he say about that?
That the house is being repossessed, that they don't have anything.
Here to discuss the latest in the New Hampshire murder trial for insurance is civil rights attorney Katie Smith and co-host Terry Austin. Terry, Maureen, the victim in this case, obviously can't take the stand, but did what her brothers say bring the trial a little bit closer to a prosecution on her behalf?
Actually, Maureen's brother, Matthew, was an excellent witness. He served two purposes. First of all, they wanted to bring her to life, and he talked about the fact that she was soft-spoken, she was a great mom, she was caring for other people. And then they also wanted to establish that she never wanted to commit suicide. And they did that by showing the emails prior to her death. She was coordinating the fact that she was making a move, and the move was scheduled for April 6th and 7th. So she basically was trying to live and moving forward with her life.
Now, on the other side, Katie, how incriminating are Argie's friend's words in testifying about his kind of mentality before the death? Does this almost mean that Argie has to testify to try to explain this away?
I mean, Brian, it's not good. I mean, of course, one of the things that the prosecution always wants to show, but it's not required, is motive. And there's so much motive here. I mean, there's 400,000 some motivating factors with the money. We know that he was in a desperate place, and his friends really paint him in that exact spot. So it's problematic. I think the best thing the defense has is to really show that this was not a homicide and it was a suicide. But that, again, is also a very uphill battle.
Absolutely. Uphill battle for William Argie indeed. It's going to be interesting with all of this circumstantial evidence, all of this motive, what the defense can do, because right now it seems like a very strong case for the prosecution. When we come back, what we know so far about the 15-year-old suspect in the Michigan high school shooting, what led up to the deadly attack, and what charges he now faces. More on the investigation next. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. Investigators say the 15-year-old boy responsible for the deadly school shooting in Michigan met with school officials just hours before shooting about concerning behavior. On Wednesday, prosecutors announced Ethan Crumbley will be charged as an adult on multiple counts, including terrorism, causing death, first-degree murder, and assault with intent to murder. This comes after Tuesday's deadly shooting in Oxford, Michigan, where officials say Crumbley shot and killed 4 people. 7 more were wounded. Prosecutors say he methodically and deliberately shot at students and teachers, firing 30 rounds during a 5-minute period. Officials later found cell phone video and journal entries detailing his plans to kill fellow classmates. On Wednesday, Crumbley was arraigned in Oakland County. He refused to speak during his appearance, but pled not guilty through his attorney. Right now, authorities are still working to determine why the suspect planned the attack.
Any updates on a motive just yet, Sheriff?
No, we obviously are not communicating with the suspect, so we can't get that from him. We're working, items that we have seized, as I talked about, documents, papers, phones, evidentiary value, items to look to see if there's something that would lead to us understanding what motivated him. But I will say again, there is nothing that he could have faced that would warrant senseless, absolutely brutal violence on other kids. And I have also asked the school if they had any records of him being bullied, and the coordinator of anti-bullying programs had no information that he'd been bullied by anyone.
Katie, journals and cell phone video, how will that affect this criminal case against Ethan Crumbley?
It's not good. I mean, the worst words that could be used against you are your own. And having some sort of written documentation of your motive that actually coincides with the acts that you took are extremely damaging. And I'm certain that they would be admissible and relevant if they really did mirror what actually occurred.
Now, Terry, the video that has gone out of the students inside the Michigan school, hearing that knock and hearing someone say, "Come out and check my badge, bro," we found out that's an actual sheriff. But one thing that I think should be applauded and is also a little heartbreaking is the quick thinking of those students to recognize a word such as bro, which was bizarre to me that an officer is using that word, and then react in the way that they did. What was your reaction to the students' quick thinking?
Well, you know, it is a good thing that it turned out to actually be the officer who was trying to get in. But you also have to applaud those students. It was brilliant of them to be thinking about the fact that the shooter could have been trying to disguise himself as a police officer. And so they would not open that door unless they were 100% sure. The reason that it's heartbreaking is because our students today have to be trained on how to avoid these types of situations, how to get out of these types of situations. And these students were thinking very quickly on their feet. They went in the room, they hid, they, bundled together. And then when they had some doubt as to whether or not this was a shooter or whether it was a police officer, they erred on the side of caution and they fled into the arms of real police officers. And again, of course, that was a real police officer, but good thinking on their part.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, Katie, as well as Terry, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.